Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we are diving deep into a really dramatic and honestly challenging part of the book of Judges, chapters 7 all the way through 12.
So here's what's on the docket. We're going to journey chapter by chapter, and what you'll see is Israel's path from this incredible, miraculous high point into a really tragic downward spiral of conflict and some seriously flawed leadership.
All right, so let's kick things off with chapter 7 and Gideon. Now you got to picture this. He's up against a massive Midianite army.
So Gideon, he starts with 32,000 soldiers. That sounds like a pretty big army, right? But here's the thing. He's facing an enemy described as being like grasshoppers from multitude. The odds are just, they're not in his favor.
But then God steps in and says something pretty wild. The people that are with you are too many. He basically wants to make it 100% clear that this victory is going to be his and his alone, so that Israel can't turn around later and say, oh yeah, my own hand saved me.
So Gideon does what he's told. He sends home anyone who's fearful and afraid. And get this, 22,000 men pack up and leave. Just like that, his army is down to 10,000.
You'd think 10,000 is a small enough number, right? Nope. God says the people are still too many. So he leads them down to the water for this really weird final test. It's all designed to find only the most alert, most ready soldiers.
And what happens next is just incredible. The army shrinks all the way down to just 300 men. 300. And these guys are going to win, not with swords and shields, but with trumpets, torches, and clay pitchers. Talk about an unconventional battle plan.
So what's the big lesson here? It's pretty clear, right? True victory doesn't come from our own strength or having the biggest numbers. It comes from having faith and just obeying God, even when His plans seem completely crazy. It's a powerful idea. God's strength really shines when we get our own out of the way.
Okay, so after that incredible high, let's see what happens next. You'd think it would be smooth sailing from here, but, well, this is where things start to crumble.
Even after this amazing victory that was all about humility, Gideon's character just takes a nosedive. He says no to being king, but he totally acts like one. He takes the spoils of war and makes this golden ephod. It's like a ceremonial vestment for a priest, and it immediately becomes an idol. It's a spiritual trap for him, his family, and pretty much all of Israel.
And this just goes to show how fast success can go sour, right? A single moment of incredible faith is basically undone by a lifetime of quiet pride and making one bad compromise after another.
And the fallout from Gideon's choices? Well, they become terrifyingly clear when we meet his son, Abimelech. So Abimelech kicks off his power grab with this totally manipulative question to the people of Shechem. He's basically saying, hey, do you want all 70 of Gideon's sons ruling over you or just one? He uses his family ties to sell himself as the only real solution.
And just look at this timeline. It is brutal. His bloody 3-year reign of terror is a direct consequence of Israel turning away from God and putting their trust in this corrupt, self-serving leader.
Look, Abimelech's story isn't just something that happened a long time ago. It's a huge warning sign about the kinds of leaders that people end up with when they forget God and start valuing raw power over actual character.
So, after all the chaos and bloodshed with Abimelech, you'd really hope the people would learn their lesson. But nope. Israel falls right back into that same old destructive pattern. We get these little moments of peace under some minor judges, but the cycle just keeps going.
And we see this cycle over and over again in the book of Judges. First, there's sin. The people start worshiping foreign gods. That leads to oppression from their enemies. Then they finally repent and cry out to God, and He sends a deliverer. After Abimelech, we see judges like Tola and Jair, who bring a bit of stability, but that underlying problem, it's still there.
What this chapter really shows us is this powerful tension. On one hand, you have the people's constant unfaithfulness, but on the other, you have God's even more constant mercy. He always responds the second they genuinely turn back to Him.
All right, now let's get to the next major judge, a guy named Jephthah. His story is intense. He's basically an outcast, a mighty warrior who was kicked out by his own family. And his whole story is defined by a terrible, impulsive promise he makes. So here he is, facing the Ammonites, and he is desperate to win.
He starts trying to make a deal with God, basically asking, what's victory really going to cost me? And then he goes and sets his own tragic price.
He makes this incredibly rash vow. He promises that if he wins, the first thing that comes out of his house to greet him, he'll sacrifice it as a burnt offering. This isn't a promise made from faith, it's born out of pure insecurity.
And then the tragedy hits. The first person to come out of his house celebrating his victory is his daughter, his only child. And feeling bound by his own words, Jephthah actually goes through with it. It's just a heartbreaking, devastating end to the story.
So the lesson here is just, wow. It's about the incredible power and weight our words can have. Jephthah's story is this terrifying warning against trying to bargain with God or making these huge, careless promises when you're all emotional and worked up.
And if you thought it couldn't get worse, it does. This whole downward spiral ends with some tragic infighting. Jephthah's victory is immediately spoiled by his own pride, and it sparks a brutal civil war with another Israelite tribe, the tribe of Ephraim.
So, at the Jordan River, they used the simple pronunciation test to catch any fugitive soldiers from Ephraim. If you couldn't say the sh sound, if you couldn't pronounce the word correctly, it was a death sentence.
And that one word, which ended up costing 42,000 men their lives, is where we get our modern term shibboleth. It's any kind of custom or word that's used to tell who's in the in-group and who's in the out-group, often with really serious consequences.
I mean, this story just perfectly sums up Israel's tragic fall. Think about it. They've gone from fighting God's enemies with God's help to slaughtering each other over some wounded pride in how you pronounce a single word. It really leaves us with a challenging question, doesn't it? What are the shibboleths in our own world? You know, the little tests of belonging we use that create these needless and sometimes deadly divisions.